At 2 a.m., my phone buzzed like a hornet. Before my brain could catch up, my feet hit the floor. The alert on my screen wasn't a stray cat or a rogue branch. It was a human shape, crouched by the big steel valve on my rainwater tank. A night vision sharpened the frame and my gut turned to ice. There was our HOA president, Linda, pristine even in grayscale, twisting my valve open with a key I'd never seen, watching the gauge drop like she owned it. I didn't yell or charge outside. I just stood in the dark, screen glow on my face, and thought, okay, Linda, game on. I'd only owned the house 6 months, but that tank, it's my baby. 5,000 gallons, filters so clean you could drink from them. Sensors, I wired it to a slick little dashboard on my phone. The whole setup came from the previous owner, George, a retired water engineer who talks about pipes like they're poetry. I'm a software guy. Numbers are my jam. Flow rates, pressure, and usage curves. But for weeks the numbers were off. Tiny 90-minute dips around midnight like clockwork. Not evaporation. Not a leak. I told my wife, Sarah, someone was stealing our water. She didn't laugh. She tucked her hair behind her ear and said, then we track it like data and make it stick. That's Sarah, cool-headed when I'm ready to grab a wrench. A data scientist who keeps her focus when mine wants to spark. We set up a camera low across the gravel, tucked another in the jasmine hedge, hard-locked the control panel. I barely slept waiting for proof. When Linda's face lit up the screen sharp as a fingerprint, my anger came cold, not hot, precise like a pressure spike you can predict. I woke Sarah and showed her the clip. She watched with that laser focus of hers and said, we don't confront, we collect. Assume she'll escalate. And escalate she did by noon. We had a letter, an emergency inspection of my non-compliant water system, scheduled by the HOA Vice President Mark, a guy who wears blazers to trim his hedges. They showed up with clipboards and fake concern, poked at fittings, squinted at the panel, and called a pipe junction suspicious. I handed them the manufacturer's spec sheet, standing in my own yard like a sitcom dad trying not to snap. They left empty-handed, no fines, no violations. But I knew they'd be back. Sure enough, 2 days later, I got hit with a landscape neglect notice. Dead grass around the tank with photos. I knelt in the dirt, and the smell hit before the logic did. Herbicide, edges too neat for drought. Sarah bagged soil samples and labeled them like a crime scene tech. Because that's what this was. I couldn't figure out why Linda was obsessed with my tank. She'd been on us since we moved in. Trash can out too long, shrubs a smidge too tall. Property values, she'd say. But this felt personal. I dug into George's binder, the one he gave me with a wink at closing. I saw what I'd skimmed before. Oversized pipes for a single home, pressure sensors in weird spots and wiring labeled for zones that didn't exist. I video called George and held up a page. He grinned like a card shark. Mateo, he said, she's special, that system. Read the emergency protocols. They're illuminating. While we gathered logs and receipts, Linda called an emergency HOA meeting to ban rainwater collection. Grandfathering be damned. She brought experts to rant about mosquitoes and biohazards. When I tried to call out the nonsense, she cut my mic on a technicality. Most folks, tired and over it, voted with the gavel. 30 days to dismantle the tank or face daily fines. I walked home. Her smug smile burned into my brain, feeling that itch you get when code compiles wrong. No rage, just a puzzle tightening its grip. Our neighbor, Clara, with her prize-winning dahlias, tipped us off. Linda bragged about her low water bill, even with a pool. In a drought, that's like saying you eat cupcakes and lose weight. Sarah and I set up a thermal camera by the fence, watching for heat signatures in the plumbing. There it was, a hidden line snaking from our property to Linda's equipment pad. We cross-checked our tank dips with Clara's memory of Linda's landscaping schedule. They matched like puzzle pieces. A pal of Sarah's at the utility pulled anonymized usage stats. Linda's consumption? Half the neighborhood average for a lot, twice the size with a resort-style pool. The pattern wasn't suspicion anymore. It was a graph you could take to court. Tom from the City Water Commission confirmed what we knew. You don't fill pools during restrictions. You don't mess with grandfathered systems. And you definitely don't run a private pipeline from your neighbor's yard to your backyard oasis. Our neighbor, Julia, an environmental lawyer, built the case. Trespass, theft, property damage, and abuse of power. We were ready to play defense at the city inspection. But Sarah wanted checkmate. Proof they can't spin, she said, slipping a tiny vial into her pocket. A fluorescent tracer, harmless, invisible in daylight, but glowing neon blue under UV. We dripped it into the tank, swirled the data, and waited. The night before the inspection, someone tried to sabotage us. The alert screamed, I ran out, found the control housing pried open. 2 valves snapped and water pooling like a wounded animal. The camera was too far for a face. But in the morning, Chief Carter, our neighbor and police chief who's done with HOA drama, found a scrap of navy pinstripe fabric on a jagged edge, Mark's signature blazer from the meeting. Carter paid him a visit, mentioned more cameras than you think, and Mark cracked like cheap plastic, confessing Linda had offered him a discounted realtor commission to disable the system. He thought it was just politics. While I patched the damage, I found George's hidden gem, a backup control module in a hollowed-out book with a folder labeled Emergency Operation Mode. 3 pages and a diagram explained it all. This wasn't just a rain barrel, it was an emergency water network, built to supply every house on our street if the city grid failed. George designed it after a brutal drought 15 years ago, when the main line cracked, leaving us high and dry in 100-degree F heat. He hid a lifeline in a tank to avoid scaring developers. There was even a warning: shut it down for more than 48 hours, and low-elevation pipes like Linda's ancient plumbing could fail. Guess whose house sits at the bottom of the hill, begging for stable pressure? We didn't have time to write a thesis. Clara called panicked. A city alert announced a catastrophic failure at the treatment plant. 72 hours without water. Stores were out of bottles. Parents were freaking out. Elderly neighbors were desperate. Tom called too. If your system is what you say, Matteo, now's the time. Julia checked the legal side. Emergency declarations trumped HOA rules. Sarah looked at me, her eyes steady. You build systems for people, she said. Make this one work. We activated the mode like we were defusing a bomb. George on video, me at the panel. Sarah reading steps aloud, bypassing broken valves, watching pressure stabilize like a long exhale. Blue indicator lights, ones I thought were for irrigation, lit up along every curb. Texts poured in. Are your taps working? Because mine are. Clara's porch became a water jug filling station. Neighbors who'd ignored me at meetings were hugging in driveways. Water does that. It makes a community out of strangers. Linda didn't buy it at first. Called it rumors. Then a neighbor filmed her walking into her utility room, where the blue light glowed on her intake valve. The video caught her face shift from confusion to dread. If my tank was feeding the neighborhood in an emergency, the water she'd stolen for months wasn't just mine, it was everyone's. That night we invited the block to our backyard, set up chairs and ran a projector. George, beaming in from his den, explained the old drought, the pilot project, and the handshake with a long-gone mayor. Tom backed up the permits. Chief Carter stood by the fence, arms crossed, saying little but meaning everything. Linda tried to derail it, storming in like a TV villain, calling me a fraud and my system an unsanctioned experiment. Someone asked about her pool. She claimed it was filled pre-restrictions, a lie since neighbors remembered it empty in March. I didn't shout. I played the video of her at my valve at 1:17 a.m., overlaid the tank dips with her landscaping schedule, then clicked to Sarah's UV photo of her pool glowing blue. Tom, in his slow official voice, said, "Filling pools is prohibited, period." Carter cleared his throat, said he'd open an investigation into theft and vandalism, and asked Linda to stop by the station tomorrow. The next day we were called downtown, Sarah and I, Linda and her lawyer, a few HOA board members, Julia, Tom, Chief Carter, and Ellen from the mayor's office. Ellen spread blueprints like a river across the table, calmly noting our unsightly tank was designated critical infrastructure 15 years ago, with a small upkeep budget George never touched. Then she slid over HOA records, a signed acknowledgement from Linda 8 years ago, accepting the president's role with a briefing about the emergency system. Meeting minutes from that month? Redacted to erase any mention of it. A surgical cut to keep power in her hands. The fallout was quiet but brutal. Linda was ousted as HOA president. The city ordered her to pay over $7,000 for stolen water and damages. Carter said criminal charges were on the table. Her house sale fell through when the water fraud surfaced, and the real estate board suspended her license for 6 months. Mark cooperated and found his conscience. The city protected our system and started planning decentralized backups for other neighborhoods, smarter sensors, resilient networks. The neighborhood shifted in ways you don't notice until you live them. Julia took over as interim president, using the gavel to build bridges, not walls. No more blanket bans on rain barrels, just sensible standards. Workshops on drought planting. A relief list for emergencies. People lingered after meetings and asked questions. Clara's dahlias won a local photo contest, and she didn't have to apologize. We landscaped around the tank, native grasses, a path, and a plaque with George's name because credit matters. A month later, we hosted a cookout where it all began. String lights glowed, and blue indicators winked like lighthouses. I looked at the tank and thought how close we came to losing the one thing that saved us. I raised a glass and said something unplanned, heavy in my chest. Sometimes the loudest person in the room is the most scared of losing control, and sometimes the thing they fight hardest to destroy is the thing they need most. It landed soft but deep. Bottles clinked, kids ran by, and for the first time since we moved in, the block felt like it breathed. So here's my question for you. Where's the line between community standards and control? Between protecting property values and abusing power? Between a neighbor who gripes and one who steals? If your HOA president was siphoning your water at 2 a.m., would you confront them or build a case that changes the game? Drop your take below. Tell me how your neighborhood handles power and accountability. Should decentralized systems like this be encouraged or banned? If this hit a nerve or made you laugh because you've met your own Linda, share it with someone who gets it. Receipts, not rage, are how you win.